This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
The last scream. The moon hung high over Pinecrest, casting its pale light over the sleepy town nestled in the woods. For June Taylor, this night marked the anniversary of her obsession with horror movies, a passion that had grown from an escape into a full-blown study. She could recount every kill in Halloween, diagram every chase in Friday the 13th, and debate the merits of Scream over its sequels. Tonight, she found herself alone in her creaky old house, her parents away on one of their rare weekend trips. June reclined on her bed, the flickering TV casting an eerie glow across her room. She was halfway through a midnight marathon of slasher classics when the power cut out. The sudden darkness swallowed her room, leaving only the moonlight streaming through the curtains. She sighed, reaching for her phone to use its flashlight. The text message notification startled her. It was from an unknown number. "Do you like scary movies?" June's heart skipped a beat. She typed back, "Who is this?" Another message popped up almost instantly. "You'll find out soon enough. You're the final girl, June. Time to prove it." Her blood ran cold. This was no prank. This was straight out of Scream. She grabbed her baseball bat, a remnant from her high school days, and edged toward the window. Pinecrest was a small town, and she could easily reach the safety of the neighbors if she moved quickly. She peeked through the curtains and saw a figure standing at the edge of her yard. The moonlight revealed a mask, white, featureless, and unnervingly blank. It was the kind of mask you could pick up at any dollar store, but it was effective in its simplicity. Her slasher film instincts kicked in. Never run upstairs, don't hide under the bed, and most importantly, keep moving. June bolted from her room, her footsteps echoing in the silent house. She raced down the stairs, heart pounding in her chest. She reached the front door and flung it open, sprinting into the night. The cool air hit her face, clearing her mind. She had to think strategically. She remembered the old tool shed in the backyard, a place filled with potential weapons. The masked figure moved with a predatory grace, closing the distance between them. June threw open the shed door and grabbed the first thing she saw, a rusty pair of hedge clippers. Not ideal, but it would have to do. The figure entered the shed, blocking the exit. June backed up, the clippers held defensively in front of her. She could see her reflection in the mask, eyes wide, breath coming in short gasps. The figure tilted its head as if considering her. "This is where you die," the figure whispered, voice distorted by some kind of modulator. June tightened her grip on the clippers, trying to steady her shaking hands. "Not tonight," she replied, channeling every final girl she had ever watched. The figure lunged, and June swung the clippers with all her might. They clashed against the mask with a sickening crunch, but it didn't slow her assailant. A gloved hand grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. She yelped, dropping the clippers. In a desperate move, she kicked the figure's knee and heard a satisfying crack. The figure staggered, giving her just enough time to slip past and run back into the house. She locked the door behind her, buying herself precious seconds. Her mind raced. She needed an advantage, something to turn the tide. The kitchen, knives. She grabbed the biggest knife from the block, her hands no longer shaking. She took a deep breath and positioned herself behind the kitchen island, waiting. The figure slammed into the door, the wood splintering under the force. The door burst open and the figure stepped inside. June stood her ground, knife ready. The figure approached slowly, almost tauntingly. "You're not as clever as you think, June," it said, the voice now mocking. "Come and find out," she retorted, her voice steadier than she felt. The figure lunged again, but this time June was ready. She sidestepped, slashing with the knife, catching the figure's arm. They grunted in pain, but kept coming. June danced around the island, using it as a barrier. She needed to tire them out, make a mistake. The figure swiped at her and she ducked, driving the knife into their side. They stumbled, and she seized the opportunity, slamming the knife down into their back. The figure collapsed, the mask finally coming off to reveal a face she recognized, her classmate Mark. "Mark? Why?" she gasped, stepping back. He laughed, a wet, choking sound. "Why not? You always loved these movies so much. Thought you'd enjoy the real thing." Horror and disbelief washed over her. She watched as the life drained from his eyes, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The sound of sirens in the distance broke her trance. Someone must have heard the commotion and called the police. June dropped the knife, her legs giving out as she slumped to the floor. When the police arrived, they found her sitting next to Mark's body, her face a mix of exhaustion and relief. They took her statement, but she knew that no one would ever fully understand what she had been through. As the paramedics wheeled Mark's body away, June looked at the empty mask lying on the floor. She had survived her own horror movie, but the cost was a piece of her soul. She would never watch another slasher film the same way again.
The Mark of Maplewood. The town of Maplewood was a place where everyone knew each other, a community nestled comfortably against the dense backdrop of the sprawling Maplewood forest. Life there was peaceful, predictable, until the day Emily Hart emerged from the shadows of the trees. Emily was a beloved kindergarten teacher, a beacon of warmth and kindness. Her sudden disappearance during a late afternoon hike plunged the town into a state of panic. For 3 days, search parties combed through the forest, their efforts fruitless. On the 4th day, she stumbled back into town, disheveled and disoriented, her eyes hollow and vacant. Her return was met with a mix of joy and relief, but something was undeniably different about her. Emily herself couldn't recall what had happened in those lost days. The town doctor, Dr. Simon Harris, found no injuries, yet Emily felt an unsettling coldness deep within her bones. She tried to resume her normal life, but an ominous change had taken hold. The first sign was subtle. Flowers wilting in her presence, leaves withering as she walked by. It was easy to dismiss these incidents as coincidences, until her husband, Michael, fell ill. A vibrant man in the prime of his life, Michael was suddenly bedridden, his skin ashen, his body ravaged by a fever no medication could break. Emily stayed by his side, her touch a constant, until he died 3 days later, his organs blackened as if consumed by rot. The autopsy revealed nothing the doctors could understand, only that Michael's organs were inexplicably decayed. A deep unease settled over Maplewood. Emily, grieving and confused, noticed a peculiar creeping sensation whenever she touched something living. It felt like ice, a chill that seeped from her fingertips. Emily's closest friend, Sarah, visited her after Michael's funeral. In an embrace meant to console, Emily felt the familiar cold seep into Sarah's skin. Within hours, Sarah too fell ill, and by dawn, she was dead. Fear gripped the town as they realized the common thread, Emily. Dr. Harris, horrified and determined to protect the town, convinced the authorities to quarantine Emily. She was moved to an isolated cabin on the outskirts, a place she couldn't harm anyone. But the contagion, whatever it was, had already woven itself into the fabric of Maplewood, spreading through those who had come into contact with Emily. Panic turned to dread as more people fell ill, their symptoms mirroring those of Michael and Sarah. Desperation gnawed at Emily's sanity. She retraced her steps, trying to recall what had happened in the forest. One night, driven by a faint, insistent memory, she returned to Maplewood Forest. The air grew colder as she delved deeper, her breath visible in the eerie stillness. She found herself at the base of an ancient tree, its twisted roots clawing at the earth. A flash of recollection struck her. She had fallen into a pit near this tree, a black void that seemed to swallow light and warmth. In that pit, something had touched her, something old and malevolent. It had marked her, turned her into a vessel of its dark will. Realizing the source of her curse, Emily returned to town and demanded to see Dr. Harris. She recounted her fragmented memories, her voice trembling with fear and determination. Dr. Harris, skeptical yet desperate, gathered what little remained of the town's courage and agreed to accompany her back to the tree. They reached the ancient tree at dawn, the sky a blood-red canvas above them. Emily felt a pulsing cold emanating from the ground, a dark heartbeat that matched the icy tendrils in her veins. Dr. Harris, clutching a vial of her blood, performed a series of tests, his face growing graver with each passing moment. "This tree," he said, "is connected to whatever is inside you. We need to sever that connection." With trembling hands, Emily gripped a knife and sliced her palm. Blood, dark and viscous dripped onto the tree's roots. The ground shuddered, and a low, mournful wail echoed through the forest. Emily felt the cold surge within her, threatening to engulf her entirely. But she also felt a shift, as if the malevolent presence was being drawn back into the earth. Dr. Harris quickly spread salt and burned sage, following old rituals he barely understood but hoped would work. The tree's roots twisted and writhed, and the air grew thick with an acrid stench. Emily fell to her knees, her vision blurring, her strength ebbing away. As the first light of dawn pierced the canopy, Emily felt a sudden release. The cold receded, drawn back into the ground, taking with it the dark presence that had marked her. She collapsed, unconscious, as Dr. Harris caught her, his relief palpable. When Emily awoke, she was back in the quarantine cabin. Dr. Harris sat beside her, his eyes weary but hopeful. "You did it," he said softly. "The contagion is gone." Emily's eyes filled with tears of relief and exhaustion. The town mourned those they had lost but slowly began to heal. The ancient tree, now lifeless and decayed, was a silent sentinel over the forest's edge, a reminder of the darkness that had almost consumed them. Emily was no longer the bringer of death, but a symbol of resilience and sacrifice. She remained isolated for a while, by her own choice, to ensure the curse had truly been lifted. Gradually, she reintegrated into the community. Her presence no longer a harbinger of doom, but a testament to the human spirit's endurance. And though Maplewood would never forget the terror that had gripped it, they learned to live again, each day a gift, each touch a precious connection to be cherished, not feared.
Sinister Child, in the quaint, picturesque town of Pinebrook, where picket fences lined the streets and flowers bloomed in every garden, the Thompson family lived in an immaculate, ivy-clad house. The Thompsons were the epitome of suburban perfection, and at the heart of their flawless existence was their only child, Emily. Emily was the child every parent dreamed of. With golden curls, porcelain skin, and large blue eyes that sparkled with innocence, she seemed almost too good to be true. She was polite, intelligent, and always the first to lend a hand. At school, teachers marveled at her academic prowess, and her peers adored her, often vying for her attention. But beneath Emily's angelic exterior lay a darkness that would slowly unravel the idyllic fabric of Pinebrook. It began with the pets. Mrs. Henderson's cat, Muffin, disappeared first. The town was small enough that such an occurrence didn't go unnoticed. Posters were put up and neighbors kept an eye out, but Muffin was never found. Then came Mr. Parker's dog, Rufus. A week later, the Petersons' canary was missing. Whispers of a pet thief or perhaps a wild animal began circulating through the town. Emily, with her usual charm, offered to help search for the missing pets, leading groups of children through the woods and backyards, always with a reassuring smile. She would comfort the distraught owners with gentle words and hugs, earning even more affection and trust from the townsfolk. But Emily's mother, Linda, began to notice small, unsettling changes in her daughter. Emily's room, usually neat as a pin, started to smell strange. At first, Linda attributed it to leftover snacks, or perhaps a forgotten school project. But one day, while Emily was at school, Linda decided to investigate. The discovery made Linda's blood run cold. Hidden beneath Emily's bed were small, crude drawings depicting the missing pets in various states of torment. A shoebox contained tufts of fur and feathers, and an unmistakable stench of decay emanated from it. Linda's heart pounded as she quickly closed the box and put everything back as she had found it. She told herself it was just a phase, perhaps an outlet for some unseen anxiety. Emily had always been sensitive. Maybe this was her way of coping with stress. Determined to understand her daughter, Linda decided to monitor Emily more closely. She noticed how Emily's smiles never quite reached her eyes anymore, and how she would sometimes stare off into the distance, her expression blank and unsettling. One evening, as Linda tucked Emily into bed, she gently probed, "Emily, sweetheart, have you been feeling okay? You can tell me if something's bothering you." Emily's eyes met her mother's with an eerie calmness. "I'm fine, Mommy. I just have new friends now." Linda's unease grew, but she didn't press further. Instead, she resolved to seek help. She contacted Dr. Stevens, the town's child psychologist, and set up an appointment. Dr. Stevens, a kind and empathetic man, welcomed Emily into his office with open arms. During their sessions, Emily's behavior was perplexing. She was polite and articulate, discussing her life with the ease of a well-adjusted child. But there was an underlying tension that Dr. Stevens couldn't ignore. He decided to delve deeper, using play therapy to uncover any hidden emotions. One afternoon, as Emily was arranging a set of dolls, she began to speak in a low, chilling voice. They didn't deserve to be loved. They were weak and useless, just like the pets. Dr. Stevens felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are you talking about, Emily?" Emily's eyes met his, devoid of any emotion. "Everyone. They're all weak, and I will make them pay." Disturbed by the session, Dr. Stevens immediately contacted Linda and advised her to seek further help from a specialist in child psychiatry. Linda's world was crumbling around her, but she couldn't fathom the depths of her daughter's malice. As the days passed, the situation escalated. Emily's behavior grew more erratic and menacing. She began to manipulate the other children, turning them against each other with whispered lies and deceit. Her charm became a weapon, and she wielded it with terrifying precision. One night, Linda awoke to the sound of muffled crying. She followed the noise to Emily's room, where she found her daughter sitting on the floor, clutching a small, trembling figure. It was the missing kitten from the Johnsons' house, its fur matted with blood. "Emily, what are you doing?" Linda gasped, her voice trembling with fear. Emily looked up, her eyes cold and unfeeling. "Teaching it a lesson, Mummy, just like I taught the others." Linda felt a wave of nausea. "The others? What have you done, Emily?" Emily's smile was devoid of innocence. "They needed to learn their place, just like you will, Mummy." Terrified, Linda tried to take the kitten from Emily, but her daughter's grip was like iron. "No, Mummy, you can't save them, or yourself." Linda knew she had to act. She called the authorities, and Emily was taken into custody for a psychological evaluation. The town of Pinebrook was in shock, unable to reconcile the sweet, perfect child they knew with the monster she had become. The investigation revealed a chilling pattern of calculated cruelty and manipulation. Emily's diary, found hidden in her room, detailed her plans and the satisfaction she derived from her actions. The once idyllic town was forever scarred by the horrors that had unfolded. Emily was sent to a psychiatric facility where she remained under constant supervision. The Thompson family, shattered by the revelations, moved away, leaving behind the ghost of a perfect child who had harbored a darkness no one could have imagined. And in the quiet, now somber streets of Pinebrook, the memory of Emily Thompson lingered like a shadow, a chilling reminder that sometimes evil wears the face of an angel.
Whispers of Willow Hall. The old plantation house known as Willow Hall stood at the edge of a sprawling, decaying estate in the heart of the Mississippi Delta. Its once grand facade had long surrendered to the relentless march of time, with ivy clawing up its weathered walls and windows that gazed out like hollow eyes. Yet, there was an undeniable allure to its decay, a whispered promise of secrets long buried beneath the creaking floorboards and sagging ceilings. Elliot Graves returned to Willow Hall on the hottest day of the year. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like a labor. His father's funeral had been a brief, somber affair, attended by a sparse gathering of distant relatives and the few remaining townsfolk who still remembered the Graves family with a mix of respect and fear. The old man had been a recluse, his fortune dwindling along with his sanity, leaving Elliot the sole heir to the crumbling estate and whatever secrets it harbored. As he stepped through the grand double doors, Elliot was struck by a sense of oppressive familiarity. He had spent his childhood summers here, a captive to the heat and the silence, exploring the vast, overgrown gardens and avoiding the stern gaze of his father. Now the house seemed to close in around him, its dimly lit halls echoing with the weight of memories best forgotten. In the library, Elliot found the first of many unsettling reminders of his father's obsession. Shelves lined with dusty tomes on southern folklore and the supernatural filled the room, interspersed with journals filled with frantic, nearly illegible scrawl. One journal in particular caught his eye. Its leather cover was cracked with age, and it bore his father's initials in faded gold leaf. Elliot flipped through its pages, his brow furrowing as he read the increasingly erratic entries. They spoke of a curse, a spectral presence tied to the very land upon which Willow Hall stood. His father had become convinced that the family's fortune was built on a foundation of blood and betrayal, and that the spirits of those wronged were restless, seeking retribution. The entries grew darker, more frantic. His father wrote of whispers in the night, shadows that moved of their own accord, and the chilling touch of invisible hands. Elliot felt a shiver run down his spine as he read the final entry, dated just days before his father's death. "They are coming for me. The sins of the past cannot be buried. I must face them, or they will take everything. The key lies beneath the willow tree." Elliot spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the house, a sense of unease growing with each passing hour. The once familiar rooms now felt alien, as if the house itself were watching him, waiting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grounds, he made his way to the overgrown garden and the ancient willow tree that stood at its center. The willow's gnarled branches hung low, swaying gently in the evening breeze. Beneath its roots, Elliot found a small, rusted key buried in the soft earth. As he held it in his hand, he felt a sudden chill, as if the very air had grown colder. The whispers his father had written about seemed to fill his ears, indistinct yet insistent. Determined to uncover the truth, Elliot returned to the house and began searching for the lock that matched the key. It was well past midnight when he found it, hidden behind a false panel in his father's study. The key turned with a creak, revealing a hidden staircase descending into darkness. The basement was damp and cold, a stark contrast to the stifling heat above. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic. As Elliot's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw the source of the smell. A small iron-bound chest, its surface stained with rust and old blood. With trembling hands, Elliot opened the chest. Inside, he found a collection of old letters and photographs, along with a tarnished silver locket. The letters told a story of betrayal and murder, of a family torn apart by greed and jealousy. The photographs were yellowed with age, but one face stood out among them. A woman with dark, piercing eyes and a look of defiance. As he held the locket, Elliot felt a sudden, overwhelming presence in the room. The air grew heavy and the whispers became louder, more insistent. He turned to see a figure standing at the foot of the stairs, a ghostly apparition with eyes that seemed to burn with a cold fire. The spirit moved closer, its form shifting and flickering like a candle in the wind. Elliot could feel its anger, its pain, and its desperate need for vengeance. He knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this was the source of his father's madness, the curse that had haunted his family for generations. In that moment, Elliot understood what he had to do. He took the locket and the letters and made his way back to the willow tree. As he dug a shallow grave beneath its roots, he whispered a prayer for forgiveness, for peace. He placed the locket and the letters in the earth and covered them, hoping to lay the spirit to rest. The air grew still and the oppressive weight seemed to lift. The whispers faded, replaced by the gentle rustling of the willow's branches. Elliot felt a sense of calm wash over him, a feeling of resolution. As he stood beneath the ancient tree, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon, Elliot knew that the sins of the past could never truly be forgotten. But perhaps, in acknowledging them, in seeking to make amends, he could finally break the cycle of haunting that had plagued his family for so long. Willow Hall, with its dark history and spectral whispers, would always be a place of shadows. But now, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance for redemption. With a final glance at the old house, Elliot turned and walked away, the morning sun casting long, hopeful shadows on the path ahead.
The forest encounter. In the deep recesses of New England, where the trees huddle close and whisper secrets to one another, a young woman named Eliza wandered aimlessly. She had ventured into the forest in search of herbs for her ailing mother, but the sun had dipped below the horizon faster than she anticipated. The forest, once a familiar friend, now seemed an alien world, dark and impenetrable. The path she had known since childhood had twisted and turned into a labyrinth of shadows. Eliza's breath came in quick gasps, her heart pounding in her chest as she realized she was lost. The oppressive silence of the forest pressed in on her, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. Her lantern cast a feeble glow, barely piercing the darkness. She pressed on, hoping to find some sign of the way home. As she trudged through the undergrowth, Eliza stumbled upon a clearing bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The air here was different, thick and shimmering as if reality itself was frayed at the edges. In the center of the clearing stood a strange alien structure, unlike anything she had ever seen. It was tall and spindly, composed of a material that seemed to shift and pulsate with a life of its own. Drawn by a mixture of fear and curiosity, Eliza approached the structure. The closer she got, the more she felt a pull, as if the very air was drawing her in. The structure emitted a low hum that resonated deep within her bones, compelling her to reach out and touch its surface. The moment her fingers brushed against the alien material, a shock ran through her body. The world around her blurred and shifted, and she found herself standing in a different place entirely. The forest was gone, replaced by a vast alien landscape under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. Strange, twisted trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal hands reaching for the heavens. Eliza's heart raced as she realized she was no longer on Earth. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to find a way back. As she looked around, she saw movement in the shadows. Figures, tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light, emerged from the darkness. They moved with an unnatural grace, their footsteps silent on the alien soil. "Who are you?" Eliza called out, her voice trembling. The figures did not respond. Instead, they circled her, their eyes never leaving her. She could feel their gaze piercing through her, as if they were examining her very soul. One of the figures stepped forward, and Eliza could see it more clearly. Its face was a grotesque mask, a mixture of human and alien features twisted into a horrifying visage. "We are the Echoes," it said, its voice a chilling whisper that echoed in her mind. "We have been waiting for you." Eliza took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you want from me?" The Echoes did not answer. Instead, they raised their hands, and the air around Eliza began to shimmer and distort. She felt a strange sensation, as if she was being pulled apart and reassembled at the same time. Pain lanced through her body, and she screamed. When the pain subsided, Eliza found herself standing in a different place. She was back in the forest, but it was not the same. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the silence was absolute. Eliza looked around, her heart sinking. She was not alone. The Echoes were here too, their glowing eyes watching her from the shadows. She could feel their presence all around her, a constant, oppressive weight on her soul. "You are one of us now," the leader of the Echoes said, its voice echoing in her mind. "You will never leave this place." Despair washed over Eliza as she realized the truth. She was trapped in this alien forest, forever bound to the Echoes. She sank to her knees, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The Echoes closed in around her, their presence overwhelming. In the days that followed, Eliza wandered the forest, searching for a way out. But no matter how far she walked, she always ended up back in the clearing with the alien structure. The Echoes were always there, watching her, whispering in her mind. She could feel herself changing, becoming more like them with each passing day. Her memories of home began to fade, replaced by visions of the alien landscape she had seen when she first touched the structure. She could feel the Echoes' thoughts mingling with her own, their presence a constant oppressive weight on her mind. She tried to resist, to hold on to her humanity, but it was a losing battle. One night, as she sat by the alien structure, she heard a voice calling her name. She looked up and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a man, tall and strong, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. He reached out a hand to her, and she felt a strange sense of familiarity. "Come with me," he said, his voice a soothing whisper. "I can show you the way home." Eliza hesitated, her heart torn. She wanted to believe him, but she knew the Echoes were always watching. She could feel their presence all around her, their thoughts mingling with her own. She knew they would never let her go. But something inside her, a spark of hope, urged her to take the man's hand. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and the moment they touched, she felt a surge of energy. The world around her shimmered and shifted, and she found herself standing in the forest once more. The Echoes were gone, and the alien structure had vanished. Eliza looked around, her heart pounding with relief. She was home. The man stood beside her, his eyes glowing with a gentle light. He smiled, and she felt a warmth spread through her body. "You are free now," he said, his voice a soothing whisper. "The echoes will never harm you again." Eliza felt tears of gratitude streaming down her face. She had been saved, and she would never forget the man who had rescued her. She knew she would always carry a part of the echoes with her, but she was no longer alone. She had found her way home, and she would never lose hope again.
The shifting doorway. Kara lived alone in a small, creaky house on the edge of town, nestled among gnarled trees and perpetually shrouded in mist. It was the kind of place that seemed to belong to another era, with its peeling paint and overgrown garden. She had inherited it from her eccentric aunt, a woman she barely knew, who had left behind an assortment of peculiar artifacts and dusty tomes that lined the shelves in every room. One rainy afternoon, Kara was sorting through the clutter in the attic, hoping to find something of value amidst the cobwebs and moth-eaten relics. She stumbled upon an old, ornate mirror, hidden beneath a heap of faded tapestries. It was framed in dark wood, intricately carved with symbols she couldn't decipher. The glass was cloudy, reflecting a distorted version of her face as she peered into it. Curiosity piqued, she decided to hang the mirror in her bedroom, thinking it would add a touch of old-world charm. As she stepped back to admire it, she noticed something strange. Her reflection seemed to waver, as if the mirror were a pool of water disturbed by an unseen hand. She blinked and the image stabilized, but an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. That night, as she lay in bed reading, Kara heard a soft, almost imperceptible humming. At first, she thought it was the wind or the old house settling, but the sound grew louder, emanating from the direction of the mirror. She set her book aside and approached the glass, the hairs on her arms standing on end. To her horror, the reflection was no longer her own. Instead, she saw a dim, shadowy landscape, bathed in a sickly green light. The air seemed thick and humid, filled with the rustling of unseen creatures. She reached out to touch the glass, and her hand passed through it as if it were a liquid membrane. Panic surged through her, but a morbid curiosity compelled her to step forward, and she found herself in another world. The air was dense with an earthy metallic scent, and the sky was a perpetual twilight, casting everything in an eerie glow. The ground was uneven, covered in a tangled mass of roots and vines that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Strange plants with bulbous, glowing pods lined the path ahead, illuminating the way with their eerie light. As she ventured deeper, Kara noticed movement in the periphery of her vision. Shadows flickered and shifted, but whenever she turned to look, they vanished. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and fascination. She came to a clearing where the air was thick with the sound of buzzing and clicking. In the center stood a towering tree, its bark twisted and gnarled like the skin of some ancient creature. Nestled among its roots was a door, identical to the one in her attic. As she approached, she felt a presence behind her. Whirling around, she saw them, creatures that defied description, their forms constantly shifting and blending with the shadows. They had no fixed shape, their bodies fluid and amorphous, with limbs that stretched and contracted like tendrils of smoke. Their eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with an unsettling intelligence, watching her with predatory interest. One of them slithered closer, its form solidifying into something vaguely humanoid. It spoke in a voice that was both many and one, a chorus of whispers and growls that made her skin crawl. "You do not belong here," it said, its words echoing in her mind. I found the mirror," Kara stammered, backing away. "I didn't mean to intrude." The creature tilted its head, studying her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her very soul. "The doorways are not meant for your kind. Return before it is too late." With that, it gestured towards the door in the tree, and Kara didn't need to be told twice. She fled towards it, the creature's eyes following her every step. She could feel the air growing colder, the ground trembling beneath her feet as she reached out and grasped the handle. As she stepped through, she found herself back in her attic, the mirror shimmering behind her before solidifying into a normal reflection. She was drenched in sweat, her heart racing as if she had just run a marathon. The humming had ceased and the house was silent once more. Shaken, she pulled the mirror down and covered it with a heavy blanket, vowing never to touch it again. But the memory of that place lingered in her mind, haunting her dreams and filling her with a sense of foreboding. She couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were still watching, waiting for another chance to lure her back. Days turned into weeks, and Kara tried to resume her normal life, but the experience had changed her. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows and avoiding mirrors altogether. She knew that the portal was still there, a gateway to a world of horrors that she could never unsee. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard the humming again. This time it was louder, more insistent. She bolted upright, her heart pounding. The blanket had slipped off the mirror and the glass was once again rippling like water. She watched in terror as a hand emerged from the surface, followed by an arm and then a face, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The creatures had found her and there was no escape. Kara's scream echoed through the empty house and then there was silence. The mirror stood untouched, its surface smooth and unblemished, reflecting only the empty room. But deep within its glass, the shadowy landscape remained, waiting for its next victim to stumble through the shifting doorway.
The haunting of Wind River. The town of Wind River nestled quietly among the rolling hills of Montana, an idyllic slice of Americana that had hardly changed in a century. Old wooden houses lined the main street, their porches sagging slightly under the weight of years. The townsfolk went about their business with the unhurried pace of those who had never been touched by the modern world's relentless rush. That was until the excavation began. It was on the outskirts of Wind River that a new housing development was slated to rise, a venture meant to bring fresh life and new money into the aging town. The first shovel of earth turned revealed something extraordinary, a burial site, ancient and untouched, belonging to the Native American tribe that once roamed these lands. The developers, eager to keep the project on schedule, quickly dismissed the significance of the find and continued their work. This decision would cost them dearly. Among the relics unearthed was an ornately carved wooden box, sealed and inscribed with symbols that none could decipher. The construction foreman, Jack Turner, was a man of practical mind and little regard for superstition. He took the box home, intending to open it and perhaps find something valuable inside. That night, under the flickering light of his living room lamp, he pried it open. Inside was a collection of dried herbs and bones, a peculiar assortment that seemed to hum with an unseen energy. Jack sneezed violently, a cloud of fine dust rising from the box and filling the air. He thought nothing of it, but within hours he was bedridden with a fever that burned through him like wildfire. By the next morning, Jack was dead, his body ravaged by an illness that defied modern medicine. His skin was covered in dark, festering sores, and his eyes had turned a milky white, as if the very essence of life had been drained from him. The townspeople were horrified, but worse was to come. The illness spread with terrifying speed. Those who had been near Jack in his final hours were the first to fall. Within days, Wind River was in the grip of a full-blown epidemic. The local clinic was overwhelmed, and the town was placed under quarantine. Panic set in as people barricaded themselves in their homes, desperate to avoid the plague. Dr. Emily Harris, the town's only physician, worked tirelessly to save her patients. She had seen many diseases in her career, but nothing like this. It was as if the plague had a mind of its own, adapting to each treatment she tried, always staying one step ahead. In her desperation, she turned to the past for answers. The town's historical records hinted at an old legend, a tale of an ancient spirit known as the Wendigo. According to the law, the Wendigo was a vengeful entity, summoned to protect the land from those who would desecrate it. It was said to bring death and disease to those who incurred its wrath. The more Emily read, the more she became convinced that this was no ordinary plague. Emily sought out the last living descendant of the tribe, an elderly woman named Misqua. Misqua had lived on the fringes of Wind River for as long as anyone could remember, her knowledge of the old ways and the spiritual world a source of fascination and fear. Emily found her in a small cabin deep in the woods, a place heavy with the scent of sage and smoke. Misqua listened as Emily recounted the events that had befallen the town. The old woman nodded slowly, her eyes distant and sorrowful. "The Wendigo has been awakened," she said. "It seeks to punish those who disturb the sacred ground." Desperate for a solution, Emily begged Misqua for help. The old woman agreed, but warned that the path ahead would be perilous. To appease the Wendigo, they would need to perform a ritual of cleansing and atonement, a ceremony that had not been conducted in generations. Under the cover of night, Emily and Misqua returned to the excavation site. They carried with them the box that had unleashed the plague and an assortment of sacred items, herbs, feathers, and stones. Misqua began to chant, her voice rising and falling in an ancient rhythm that seemed to resonate with the very earth. As the ritual progressed, the air grew thick with energy. Emily felt a presence, something vast and ancient, watching them. Misqua called out to the Wendigo, pleading for forgiveness and offering the items as a token of peace. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a cold wind howled through the trees. For a moment, it seemed as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the wind died down. The night was still once more. Misqua collapsed, exhausted but alive. Emily rushed to her side, fearing the worst. "The Wendigo is appeased," Misqua whispered. "The plague will end." True to her word, the plague began to recede. Those who had been on the brink of death made miraculous recoveries. The sores vanished and the fever broke. Wind River slowly returned to its peaceful, unhurried existence, the memory of the plague fading like a bad dream. But some things were not so easily forgotten. The excavation was halted, the site declared a protected area. The townspeople, once dismissive of their land's history, now held a deep respect for the past and the spirits that watched over them. Emily never forgot the night she faced the Wendigo. It changed her, opened her eyes to the unseen world that lay just beyond the veil of reality. And while the people of Wind River went about their lives, she knew that they were never truly alone, that the spirit of the land was always watching, always waiting. In the end, it was not the Wendigo's wrath they feared most, but the memory of how close they had come to losing everything to the ancient forces that had once again stirred from their slumber.
The Survivor Asylum. The old mansion stood at the edge of a dense forest, its weathered facade a stark reminder of bygone days. Once a luxurious estate, it had been converted into a sanctuary for those who had seen the face of death and lived to tell the tale. Now, it was a haven for the scarred and broken. Lila paced the grand foyer, her nerves frayed. She had been here for weeks, seeking solace among those who understood her pain. She glanced at the others. Ben, the burly man with a haunted gaze, Marcy, the petite woman whose fingers were always fidgeting, and Ethan, the quiet observer with a perpetual scowl. They had all survived unspeakable horrors, their lives forever marked by tragedy. This support group, hidden away from the world, was supposed to be a place of healing, but Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "We need to stick together," Ben said, his voice a low rumble. "That's the only way we'll get through this." Marcy nodded, her eyes darting around the room. "We've faced worse. We can handle this." Ethan remained silent, his gaze fixed on the fireplace. Lila wondered what thoughts were swirling in his mind. She had her own demons to contend with, but the unease that had settled over the mansion was something new, something palpable. The first sign of trouble had been the strange noises at night, footsteps echoing through empty hallways, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Then came the disappearances. Rachel, the group's organizer, had vanished without a trace. The mansion, once a refuge, had become a prison of paranoia. "We need to find Rachel," Lila insisted. "She wouldn't just leave us." Ben shook his head. "It's not safe out there. We should wait until morning." But waiting felt like a death sentence. Lila's instincts screamed at her to move, to act. She glanced at Ethan, who gave her a barely perceptible nod. They had to do something. The group split into pairs, each taking a section of the mansion to search. Lila and Ethan ventured into the west wing, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The air was thick with dust, and the dim light from their flashlights cast eerie shadows on the walls. "This place gives me the creeps," Ethan muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila nodded, her heart pounding. They checked room after room, finding nothing but empty spaces and forgotten memories. As they approached the end of the hall, a faint sound caught Lila's attention. A soft, rhythmic tapping. "Ethan, do you hear that?" He nodded, his eyes narrowing. They followed the sound to a small door, partially hidden behind a faded tapestry. Lila's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "We have to go down," Lila said, steeling herself. Ethan nodded, and they carefully made their way down the stairs. The basement was cold and damp, the air heavy with the scent of mildew. Their flashlights flickered, casting an unsteady glow on the stone walls. At the far end of the room, they found a makeshift cell. Inside, huddled in a corner, was Rachel. Her clothes were torn, and her eyes wide with terror. "Rachel!" Lila exclaimed, rushing to her side. "What happened?" Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "It's here, it won't let us leave." Ethan turned to Lila, his face pale. "We need to get out of here now." As they helped Rachel to her feet, the sound of footsteps echoed down the staircase. Lila's blood ran cold. They were not alone. The figure that emerged from the shadows was tall and gaunt, its face hidden behind a grotesque mask. It moved with a predatory grace, its eyes glinting with malice. "Run!" Ethan shouted, pushing Lila and Rachel towards the stairs. They fled, their footsteps pounding against the stone floor. The creature was fast, its pursuit relentless. Lila's mind raced, her survival instincts kicking in. They needed a plan, and fast. They burst into the main hall, slamming the door behind them. Ben and Marcy were already there, their faces masks of fear and confusion. "What's going on?" Ben demanded. "No time to explain," Lila panted. "We need to barricade the doors." They worked quickly, piling furniture against the entrances, their movements frantic. The creature's howls echoed through the mansion, a chilling reminder of their imminent danger. "We can't stay here," Marcy said, her voice trembling. "It'll find a way in." Lila nodded, her mind racing. "We need to get to the car, it's our only chance." The group moved as one, a desperate dash through the darkened hallways. They burst through the front door, the cool night air a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. The car was parked at the edge of the driveway, a beacon of hope in the darkness. As they piled into the car, the creature emerged from the mansion, its eyes burning with fury. Ben fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. The engine roared to life, and they sped down the driveway, gravel flying beneath the tires. Lila glanced back, her heart still racing. The mansion loomed in the distance, a silhouette against the moonlit sky. They had escaped, but the terror of that night would haunt them forever. As they drove into the night, Lila knew that their ordeal was far from over. They had survived one nightmare, only to find themselves in another. The sanctuary they had sought was a lie, and the bonds they had formed were their only hope of survival. But in the world they lived in, hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the horrors that lurked in the shadows. And as the survivors huddled together, they realized that they were bound not just by their pasts, but by the uncertain and terrifying future that awaited them.
Veins of crimson lies. In the dim Gothic halls of our Carpathian refuge, time stretched and yawned, a languorous beast that devoured days and nights without distinction. The castle, ancient and forgotten by the living, was a labyrinth of secrets, its stones soaked with centuries of blood and longing. My name is Valeria, the first of his consorts, and it is here that our tale unfolds, a story of love, betrayal, and the merciless grip of immortality. The night I met him, the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming nightshade. He found me wandering the forest, lost in despair, after fleeing an unwanted betrothal. His eyes, dark and bottomless, promised solace and eternity. "Valeria," he had whispered, his voice a velvet caress, "come with me. I will make you mine forever." And so I surrendered. The transformation was excruciating, my veins igniting as his lifeblood coursed through them, but the agony was a prelude to a euphoria I could not have imagined. I became his, bound by a hunger that transcended mortal comprehension. Together we shared nights of unparalleled passion and fed on the lifeblood of the unwary. but I was not alone in his affections. Soon he brought others to our fold, each as lost and desperate as I had been. Leora came next, a spirited young woman from the southern lands, her laughter like music in the night. She was fire to my ice, her rebellious nature a stark contrast to my contemplative demeanor. I despised her at first, jealous of her vitality, but our shared suffering forged an unbreakable bond between us. Then came Amara, the delicate beauty from the Far East, her soul as fragile as a spider's web. She was his favored, the one he doted upon, her fragility drawing out a tenderness in him that I had never seen. This favoritism stoked the embers of my jealousy into a raging inferno, and yet I could not help but love her too. We were sisters in damnation, bound together by the blood that flowed through our veins and the sorrow that weighed on our hearts. He was a master of manipulation, our beloved lord. His affections were a pendulum, swinging unpredictably between us, keeping us on the knife's edge of hope and despair. We loved him fiercely, and he thrived on our devotion, but he also delighted in our torment, pitting us against one another with whispered promises and cruel games. His power over us was absolute, or so he believed. It was Leora who first suggested rebellion. "We are not mere playthings," she declared one night, her eyes blazing with the fire of her indomitable spirit. "We are stronger together. We can break free from his tyranny." Her words were a revelation. I had been so consumed by my own anguish that I had not considered the possibility of escape. But now, the seed of defiance took root in my heart. We began to plot in secret, our whispered plans echoing through the empty halls. We knew it would be perilous. Our Lord's wrath was formidable, but the desire for freedom was stronger than our fear. The night of our rebellion was shrouded in darkness, the moon hidden behind a shroud of storm clouds. We moved as one, our steps silent on the cold stone floors. He was in his private chambers, oblivious to the storm brewing within his own walls. We had prepared well, arming ourselves with silver and holy relics, tools of our emancipation. As we burst into his chamber, his eyes widened in disbelief. "What is this treachery?" he roared, his voice a thunderclap that shook the castle to its very foundations. "We are no longer your prisoners," Leora spat, her dagger gleaming in the dim light. "We claim our freedom." The battle was fierce and desperate. He was powerful, his strength magnified by centuries of unchallenged dominion. But we fought with the ferocity of cornered animals, our rage and desperation fueling our every move. Amara, frail as she was, revealed a hidden strength, her delicate hands wielding a silver blade with deadly precision. In the end, it was our unity that proved his downfall. As he lay on the ground, weakened and defeated, I felt a pang of sorrow. Despite everything, a part of me still loved him, but that love was tainted by the years of manipulation and pain. With a final heart-wrenching cry, I plunged my dagger into his heart, ending his reign. The castle, once a symbol of our entrapment, began to crumble around us. We fled into the night, the cold air a sharp contrast to the warmth of the blood that had bound us for so long. Standing on a hill, we watched the castle burn, the flames devouring the remnants of our past. I took Leora and Amara's hands, feeling a strange sense of peace. We were free, but the world was vast and unknown. Our journey was just beginning. "To freedom," Leora said, her voice trembling with emotion. "To sisterhood," Amara added, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "To a new beginning," I whispered, feeling the weight of centuries lift from my shoulders. We turned away from the ruins of our old lives and stepped into the future, our blood-bound promises guiding us toward a destiny of our own making. The night was ours, and with it, the promise of a life unfettered by the chains of our past.
The haunting of Paloma House. The train's whistle pierced the evening air, heralding Noemi's arrival in the small, mist-shrouded town of Paloma. She stepped onto the platform, her senses immediately assaulted by the damp, earthy scent of decaying leaves and the faint aroma of burning wood. She tightened her coat around her slender frame, the chill of the autumn air biting through the fabric. Her thoughts were consumed by the letter she had received from her cousin Elena. The frantic, nearly incoherent missive spoke of ghostly apparitions, sinister shadows, and a suffocating dread that permeated every corner of Paloma House. Noemi hailed a carriage, her suitcase bumping along the cobblestone streets as she was ferried through the town. The journey to Paloma House was a winding path through dense woods, the trees closing in like skeletal fingers. As they neared the mansion, a foreboding structure of dark stone and ivy, the driver cast a wary glance at Nomi. "Be careful, miss," he warned, his voice low and gravely. "That place is cursed." Noemi thanked him with a nod, her resolve steeling. She was determined to uncover the truth behind her cousin's plight. The house loomed before her, an imposing edifice with tall, narrow windows that seemed to watch her every move. She ascended the creaking steps, the front door groaning open under her touch. Inside, the air was thick with dust and an almost palpable sense of melancholy. Eleanor's voice echoed from the grand staircase, weak but recognizable. "Noemi, you're here." Noemi rushed to her cousin's side, finding Elena looking frail and haunted, her once vibrant eyes now dull and ringed with shadows. They embraced, and Noemi could feel the tremor in Elena's hands. "Tell me everything," Noemi urged as they settled into the dimly lit parlor, the fireplace sputtering to life. Elena recounted the series of strange events that had plagued her since she moved into Paloma House. It began with whispers in the night, barely audible but unmistakably malevolent. Objects moved on their own, and cold spots lingered in rooms that should have been warm. The worst was the figure she saw in the mirror, a gaunt woman with hollow eyes, standing just behind her. "I tried to leave," Elena confessed, her voice shaking. "But the moment I stepped outside, it felt like something was pulling me back. I can't escape, Noemi. This house won't let me go." Determined to help her cousin, Noemi spent the next few days exploring the mansion. She discovered a hidden room behind a tapestry in the library, its walls lined with books on the occult and ancient rituals. A journal belonging to the mansion's original owner revealed a history of dark practices and blood sacrifices meant to bind spirits to the house. One night, as Noemi pored over the journal by candlelight, a sudden chill enveloped her. The flame flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. She felt a presence, cold and oppressive, pressing down on her chest. Struggling to breathe, she stumbled to the window and threw it open, gasping for fresh air. In the moonlight, she saw it. A figure standing in the garden below, dressed in tattered white, its face obscured by a veil. The figure raised a hand, pointing directly at her. Nomi's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away from the window, the apparition disappearing into the shadows. The following morning, Noemi confronted Elena, who admitted to having seen the same figure multiple times. Desperation in her eyes, Elena begged Noemi to help her break the curse that bound them to Paloma House. Together, they scoured the mansion for clues, uncovering a hidden basement sealed off by a heavy wooden door. The air grew colder as they descended the stairs, their breath visible in the dim light of their lantern. The basement was a macabre chamber of horrors. Rusty chains hung from the walls, and dark stains marred the stone floor. In the center of the room lay an altar covered in dusty, age-worn cloth. Upon it rested a book, bound in cracked leather, filled with dark incantations and rituals. Noemi realized this was the source of the curse. A spell that had trapped the spirits of the mansion's victims, binding them to Paloma House for eternity. Determined to end the nightmare, Noemi and Elena prepared to perform a counter-ritual, one they found in the journal. It required courage and precise incantations, the words heavy with ancient power. As they chanted, the temperature in the room plummeted and the very walls seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Suddenly, the figure from the garden appeared before them, its veil lifted to reveal a skeletal face twisted in agony. The spirits of the house, angered and restless, swirled around them, their wails a cacophony of torment. Noemi and Eleanor's voices grew louder, their resolve unyielding as they finished the incantation. With a final, resounding word, the spirits screamed and dissipated, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. The figure before them flickered and vanished, leaving behind a profound silence. The house, once suffocating and dark, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Noemi and Eleanor emerged from the basement, the first rays of dawn breaking through the gloom. They stood on the front steps, the morning light casting long shadows across the garden. Paloma House, now free from its curse, seemed almost peaceful. Elena smiled weakly, the colour returning to her cheeks. "Thank you, Noemi." I don't know what I would have done without you." Noemi embraced her cousin, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. They had faced the darkness together and emerged victorious. As they walked away from Paloma House, the birds began to sing, and the chill in the air dissipated, replaced by the warmth of the rising sun. The haunting of Paloma House was over, but its memories would linger, a testament to the power of courage and the unbreakable bond of family.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.